Right, we have two government department speakers for this session with overviews on the Australian policy environment. First of all, we have Harold Lomas, Assistant Secretary, Research Commercialisation Branch of the Australian Government Department of Education. He'll be speaking about the Australian policy environment. Harold Lomas is a public policy expert with over 30 years of experience in the Australian public service, spanning leadership roles in education, health and industry portfolios and advisory roles. He's driven reforms in research funding, higher education policy and aged care, and is currently leading work to improve data analytics to support the research commercialisation policy agenda. After Harold speaks, Anthony will speak as part of this session, and then we'll open for questions. Anthony Hausko currently leads the data and reporting team at the Department of Industry, Science and Resources as the Director of the Secretariat for the Strategic Examination of R&D. His team has recently put out a discussion paper for consultation, so it's a great time to be talking with him. Anthony Hausko is a public policy and data specialist with over 2 decades of experience working in academia and the Commonwealth Public Service. He's worked as an associate lecturer in economics at the University of Sydney and has also held senior advisory positions in the Productivity Commission, the Parliamentary Library, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the National Indigenous Australians Agency and DISA. Anthony has led Commonwealth-wide projects on Indigenous data and Indigenous community data projects and has been involved in negotiations on a number of recent new Closing the Gap targets on inland waters and community infrastructure. Please leave your questions until we've had both speakers. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Natalie, and it's great to be with you today and to see such an excellent turnout. And that was an amazing presentation, David, really interested for us sort of data nerds in my team. So, and it's quite a hard act to follow. But today I'm going to try and give you an overview of the current policy agenda, including 4 key programs, and provide a few reflections on the role of data in that agenda, including KCA's SCOPA collection. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? Well, put simply, the agenda is designed to address shortcomings in our capacity to translate and commercialise our research. There are many examples of successful research commercialisation in our universities, but as reflected in the data you see here, while we produce world-leading research in many fields, our rankings are much lower on key indicators of translational research and commercial outcomes. And this is in large part due to poor connections with industry. And specific challenges here include a lack of incentive for universities at both structurally and culturally, a lack of translation capability, and also the structure of our industry, 95% of which are small to medium enterprises, and therefore don't really have that sort of have less capacity and interest in engaging. So to the agenda. So 3 programs form, the first 3 here form the core of the agenda. That's our industry PhD programs, Australia's Economic Accelerator, and the Trailblazers Universities program. Together they comprise an investment of more than $2 billion in Australian government funding. That's Australian dollars. They also build on a broader range of program effort in the department's programs and other programs, including the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy. So before I take you through those quickly, a couple of broad points I would make. So first, when I was preparing for this presentation, I was reflecting on the range of policy initiatives that I've seen since I joined the Higher Education and Research Department more than 10 years ago. And they've tended to be focused on industry engagement on both the research and on the teaching and learning side. Some of you in the audience will remember some of these: boosting commercial returns, NISA, the National Innovation and Science Agenda, the Watt Review, changes to block grants, the ACOLA review of research training. And, I think each of these have driven some important improvements, but the current agenda is really in a different league in terms of its magnitude and transformational potential. So, with ongoing programs like the AEA and our industry PhD programs, we've now got, initiatives that look beyond the next 10 years and which importantly also have enjoyed support from both sides of politics, which is a great thing as well. So the other point that I'd make is that they're not designed to operate in isolation, but rather they're designed to work in tandem to drive cultural change. Part of that is encouraging universities to engage, communicate and engage with industry better, market their research, focus on industry problems, but it's also about changing attitudes. So I'm going to really quickly take you through these programs. With our industry PhD and fellowship schemes, we now for the first time have an ongoing mechanism and set of incentives to improve workforce mobility across academia and industry. The problem we're trying to solve here is, really shown in this graphic on this slide. We have a strong pipeline of PhDs, but few who can work in both academia and industry. And, we have a very low rate of private sector employment. The department's analysis also confirms that, that as you would expect, countries with higher private sector employment of PhDs perform better on the Global Innovation Index. And as shown on this slide, there's 6 different program streams, and they're each designed to tackle a different angle of the problem. But they're all focused on, creating a pipeline of researchers who can engage with industry and work on solving real problems in a range of settings. The AEA, it's a stage-gated, fast-fail program, to enable researchers to show both proof of concept and proof of scale. It's designed to bridge the valley of death where, groundbreaking research often sits on the shelf because of uncertainty and risk around commercial returns. And so from the department's perspective, the AEA really represents a significant shift in the policy landscape. It's really the first priority-driven research translation grants program we've had in this country, one that's directly linked to national economic priorities. And, you can see some of the focus areas we've targeted in the first investment plan on this slide. These are areas that the department's analysis suggests are areas where Australia has research and other strengths, and there's future market opportunities, but where our translation is low by international standards. Trailblazers sort of brings together these various threads. It's supporting a number of lead and partner universities around the country to drive better commercialisation and capability in key strategic areas of strength and priority for Australia. They've also formed a thriving network, which includes, around about 1/3 of our universities. And we're hoping that they'll serve as exemplars of best practice about how you collaborate with industry, how you do your IP arrangements, how you do your academic pathways with industry and so forth. end, Chris, I won't sort of dwell on, but, you know, the research infrastructure helps enable the research commercialisation agenda as well. You know, it has an important role in enabling researchers to tackle national and global challenges, including agricultural productivity, water and energy security, environment sustainability, urban planning and human health. And as you see on this slide, it's a focus for quite a lot of significant research collaboration, and it's also a significant driver of industry co-investment as well. So I'm going to conclude with a few reflections on the role of data in this agenda. There's three dimensions that we in the department think are particularly important. First, evaluation and policy review. You know, while it's too early to see the impact of this agenda in the data, there's a lot of work underway in the department to develop evaluation frameworks for each of these programs and for the agenda as a whole. It will be no doubt a complex exercise because there's so many factors involved, and there's also the impact of the broader economy to take into account. And, you know, obviously SCOPA and the other data we have is just one input. You know, there's other sources of qualitative information, and context is everything when interpreting the data. But it's clear that from where I sit, it's very clear that data is becoming increasingly important, both for the sector and for the government, to sort of give us that sort of sense of, that objective sense of where we're tracking and you know, how we're going over time. The second dimension is demonstrating impact. Now, this is something that we've all got a shared interest in sort of showing the great outcomes we can get from our world-class research and sort of continuing to sort of build support for our research system. And, you know, SCOPA provides us a succinct, ready-made set of facts that university leaders, TTOs, policymakers can kind of use to show what we're sort of achieving. Of course, again, the stories are important, the case studies, the success stories, and, you know, it's great that that sort of information is also collected as part of the SCOPA process as well. And then finally, benchmarking. So, you know, in the department, we're very mindful that, you know, not all universities are the same in terms of the intensity and the nature of their research commercialisation activities. But regardless of these different approaches, you know, we think it's important to support the sector in having consistent measures that they can use to compare themselves with their peers. And SCOPA is really important here because it captures quite a broad range, diverse range of activities at the university level. So we see this third dimension as really important to the agenda, and it's been a significant focus in our work with, in our partnership with KCA, which is now in its third year and which we've sort of got a lot out of. Shamila from my team will talk a bit in the next session about the sort of range of products and tools we've been developing, in particular a visual dashboard that is based around SCOPA. She'll also give you a small taste of the international benchmarking as well, work that we've been doing. And, you know, what that work really shows is, you know, by world standards, the sector does not invest in tech transfer to, you know, to the same extent. But that we actually do produce some pretty good outcomes for the investment we make. So I think that's kind of an important message. And, you know, we produce good outcomes, but in short, there's more we can do. So just to summarise in closing, the key message I want to leave you with is that we now have a comprehensive research commercialisation policy agenda and suite of programs. And it's really a great time of opportunity for research commercialisation in Australia. Not all universities will use these programs to the same extent and in the same ways, or pursue the same, you know, strategies in the same way. but it's important that they have the tools they can use to assess the scale and the nature of their activity, and consider what their future efforts will look like in this area. So we in the department very much look forward to continuing to work with you all in supporting this work, and in this context we'll be really interested to hear your feedback and the rest of the discussion this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you. And yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to talk briefly about the strategic examination of R&D, or the SERD for short. So I'm Anthony Hausko. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor from the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. I'm just going to talk this afternoon briefly about really three main things. I want to talk a little bit about the examination, but above all else, I want to encourage you all to input to the review. It's really important that we get as many stakeholder opinions as possible about what is working, but more importantly, what could work more effectively in Australia's R&D system. So I want to talk briefly about the review. I also want to just run through a couple of stats. The theme so far of this session has been data, and that's kind of what I do on the review, as is some of my other colleagues, one of whom's here today. But I just want to talk about, it was really interesting in the previous presentations, David's first presentation, when he presented that sort of scorecard for how Australia is going. What was really noticeable in terms of areas of kind of less strong performance was the gross expenditure on R&D, and then secondly, productivity, labour productivity. So I want to talk a little bit about what the review is going to look at in those areas, because there's some important starting observations for our review. And then the last thing, if I get time, is just a couple of very short points about data. Harold's talked about SCOPA, but we really think this review has an evidence base that has changed a lot recently in Australia. As many of you would be familiar, this is not the first rodeo when it comes to a review of the R&D system. That's putting it mildly. And I did have a slide which I think didn't make it, but it was a kind of how many reviews have there been, and there were anyway. But we do really genuinely think that the evidence base, particularly on some really important issues about the role of R&D in improving productivity, and about the role of novel innovation and R&D as opposed to just adopting stuff from elsewhere. We really think some of the data has changed, particularly like large linked data sets like BLADE and PLIDA in the ABS. We think the data landscape has changed significantly to have a better idea of what's going on in those processes. So, and I'm probably not going to be able to cover all that in 10 minutes, but I'll have a crack. So, yeah, so we kicked the review off. The government announced the review probably a couple of weeks ago. It's due to go for 12 months. Submissions to the review close the initial stage. So we released a discussion paper which goes through a lot of these issues in a lot more detail and encourages people to input. Those initial submissions are due kind of mid-April, I think. So there's some time to put in submissions once you've had a read of the discussion paper. It's a 12-month process. We're doing a lot of consultation already across the country, and we'll continue to do that. One-on-one consultations, but then also large roundtables and larger stakeholder meetings. And the review is led by an expert panel of 4 people. So Robin Denholm, who's currently the chair of Tesla, Tech Council of Australia, Ian Chubb, who many of you may be familiar with, previous chief scientist, Professor Fiona Wood, and Dr. Kate Cornick, from Victoria. So the panel have been conducting a lot of these consultations already and will continue to do so. The process, as I said, is it's a 12-month process. Some of this cadence will be familiar from a lot of public reviews, obviously. So we're in the process now of harvesting opinion, talking to stakeholders, putting out a discussion paper, as I mentioned, that frames the issues. We'll then go into across the year to preliminary positions, further consultations, and then a final report towards the end of the year or early next year. I just wanted to also mention some of the other important contextual issues that frame the review, and some of them have already been covered in the previous two presentations. So there's a big emphasis on missions internationally, and Mariana Mazzucato, some of you may be familiar with her work, but a big emphasis in some nations now about missions as large projects that can drive innovation and R&D. There's significant issues, as always, in industry policy, Future Made in Australia, the CHIPS Act, which David mentioned before, the IRA, both in the US. We've also already heard a lot about things like the RDTI, the R&D tax incentive, and how that is working, but how it could be improved. And then there's issues around things like more direct grants, packaging of direct and indirect supports, etc. So we're really interested in all of that, how it could be made more effective. And we're interested, as I mentioned, in the evidence base and the data as a really important part of this review. So just very quickly, because time, I don't know if we're running out of time, but okay. Just quickly, just to reiterate, I guess, some of the points that David in particular covered earlier. So Australia's current performance in R&D, many of you will be aware, is not so great. So we're currently, the gross expenditure on R&D is about 1.66%. It peaked in around 2008, and then there's been a pronounced drop-off since then. Internationally, we're a lot lower than quite a lot of comparator countries, as you can see here. We understand that there's a whole range of cultural and historical differences between countries, so it's benchmarking us against South Korea or Israel, for example, can be complicated and may not, get you as far as you need to go, but still we think there's a significant point here about the gross expenditure being pretty low in international terms. The other really kind of stark fact here is that business expenditure in R&D is particularly weak in Australia, so the business sector spending on R&D seems very low compared to the OECD average. As I mentioned before, there's also quite a lot of data that shows that Australia at the moment is very reliant on new to firm innovation as opposed to new to market innovation. So there's a real story there around adoption versus doing it here in Australia. That's a key message from the data so far as well. And there's a debate too. The Productivity Commission, for example, I think released a report in 2023 that said that kind of 98% of Australian firms adopt, and that's okay for our economy. So there's a big debate there about how how expansive we want to be, and we're interested in hearing any views on that. Does R&D matter? Yes, it really does. So just quickly, the IMF in 2021 looked at the effects on total factor productivity in Australia of ICT investment, but then also other investment and R&D investment. And their econometric work suggested that particularly in the 3 and 5 year periods, that R&D had a very large impact on total factor productivity, and that impact was significantly larger than the other types of investment. And this is a very recent research using that BLADE data set. For those of you who don't know BLADE, it's a very large data set that's curated by the ABS. It has tax data, it has intellectual property patent data, it has a whole range of data. It's an amazing resource. And they've also got a data set called PLIDA, which is kind of more on the social kind of, employment, community sector sort of data. So there's some really promising new data sets out there to inform policy, and we're hoping to use those in the review in great detail to have a look, particularly given some of the previous reviews I've mentioned did not have that data, particularly in the mid 2000s, for example, where there wasn't a huge resource that is there at the moment in terms of evidence. And that's pretty much it. But yeah, so the next steps, we've put out the discussion paper a couple of weeks ago. I'd really invite you all to have a read and encourage you all to input into the review. That's the email address, but also if you just go to DISR, you'll find it. There's a portal there where you can have your say in the review. So, but yeah, thank you and welcome your input and engagement. Yeah, thanks, Natalie.
Right, so we're hoping those two microphones should be good. I guess I'd like to just start with one question that's close to my heart, Harold, is what is the Department of Education doing to support tech transfer officers in the role? You've got lots of funding for AEA and all of these initiatives, but what about the tech transfer office?
Yeah, so I guess support for the tech transfer office is sort of provided indirectly through that full range of initiatives I described. And, I guess, if you look at a program like the AEA, for example, it depends on there being a tech transfer capacity in universities to kind of develop up those proposals. So it really goes hand in hand. And, there's, the industry PhD sort of programs are building that sort of capability more in our PhD candidates and graduates, and creating a pipeline of students, a pipeline of graduates that will be more able to work in tech transfer roles. I know that a lot of tech transfer professionals aren't PhDs, but it's all part of a broader cultural shift that's sort of aiding that direction.
Thank you. As promised, I'm opening questions up to the floor. I think Tam at the back there. No, definitely because everything's being recorded. So maybe you just pass the microphone through. Great.
So it's Tamantha from the University of Wollongong. It's great to see all these new initiatives, but there's still quite a gap between the funding available for an industry PhD and then an AEA, where we're seeing lots drop off that $50,000 to $100,000 worth of seed research translation funding. Is there anything coming or that we could predict in that sort of landscape, in that gap between just starting out and being ready for an AEA?
So I can't talk too much about the future, as it would be a brave move at this time in the cycle. But look, I would say that, and this goes back to what I said about, that the measures are intended to work in tandem and together. And I think that sort of achieving that sort of integration across those different programs is going to be an increasing focus in the years to come. We've been sort of like working very hard to implement the programs and get them going. And I think in the next stage, it's going to be more about how we can make those connections. Look at where there might be gaps. Look at some of the issues around, tech transfer capability and what you do there, and what are the needs of different universities, the smaller ones, for example, the rural ones. But I think it'll be taking more of that view, building on the lessons that we get from things like Trailblazers. So I think that's going to be a big theme in the next part, as will be, that sort of continuing to encourage industry co-investment and collaboration, which is important across all those initiatives, and that can sort of help to also provide more opportunities of the type you're talking about, I think.
Excellent. Erin?
Thanks, Natalie. Erin Raymond, Queensland University of Technology. Harold, we love the potential of AEA and the program. Is there any thought in terms of how the ARC has spent a lot of time recently around defining timeframes for both grant rounds and announcements, and particularly putting some legislation around once the announcements are ready to go, when they are announced? We're conscious that there's a bit of a delay at the moment around that first proper round that went out last year.
Yeah, and aware of that, the level of interest out there and concerns about those sort of issues. And I think it's something that we're just going to get, better at as we go. It's a major new program. It's a new area of activity for the department, and running these programs, but providing that sort of useful information to the sector and clear and transparent. Transparency around all of those things is going to be something that we're going to continue to try and do better at.
Excellent.
That'd be great. Thanks.
We had a question, the gentleman with his hand up just there first. Thanks.
Hi, John Bell from the University of Southern Queensland. Trailblazer question, not surprisingly, because we were on the map. You actually said it was a $1.3 billion program, but it's really a $300 million investment program from the government, and the rest of it is being sucked out of the rest of the system, the university system and industry. The CHIPS Act in the US, I think, is actually $280 billion of US government money. And so if we actually just take the ratio, we should be spending 20 billion or maybe 10 billion on the Trailblazers, if that's the equivalent sort of program, and it looks very similar. Even if you add the AEA in, we're just not in the hunt to be competitive. And so it's a great program. It's helped us build our technology transfer capability, but it's just too little too late for the country. Sorry, that was a comment more than a question. Maybe it's an encouragement for you to actually answer the question positively and then tell your minister that that's what should happen.
Yeah, well, just quickly, I won't take too much time, but I think, as I said, it's an unprecedented investment. I know I take your what you say that you don't think it's enough, but it's sort of a suite of programs and opportunities we didn't have before, and a big focus of all of those issues are about how you drive cultural change in industry and universities working together, and you sort of government and industry both co-investing, and that the process in itself of making those sort of deals and trying to work and get that collaboration is worthy in itself. So it's not just about the money, but it's also about the relationships and the cultural change that happens as part of the process.
We have time for, well, we'll see if we get one or two questions in. Yes, we definitely can get this one in.
Hi, Viraj from ANU Tech Transfer Office. I've got a question on industry participation in our ecosystems and grants. So, like the last comment, basically, we were relying on government to pay a lot of the R&D funding. We see funds are pretty tiny compared to what's out there globally. Other than the R&D tax incentive, is there any risk incentive program or policy for large government bodies to put their capital in early stage research? Or are you thinking about on those lines? How do we get big players to put more capital at risk in research?
I think you put the question in about R&D tax incentive in there. So I think Andrew was thinking you were referring to him, but then you're talking about research as well. And so Harold, you're talking about like an SBIR program or something?
Industry.
I can probably take that.
Yeah, go that.
We are certainly hearing a lot about SBIR, absolutely, in our consults so far. So yeah, we're open to looking at that, and anything else that people raise with us in terms of bigger packages, I guess. There's also, as I mentioned on one of the slides, there's also that issue about, in terms of how things happen across time, whether packages, I guess, of different types of support might be useful. But so we're really open to views on that. And it sounds like you may have some, so we'd welcome it. Yeah.
Can I just ask if you're going to be here between 3 and 3:30, like at the networking? Are you still around then, or do you need to leave?
I've got to toddle off. I've got to go back to work.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. Just obviously following up with Andrew on that, what sort of programs could be put in place. Does everyone know what an SBIR program is, or are we using acronyms and not explaining? Small business. Thank you. I'm used to using SBIR as the acronym. Do we have any more questions? Yep, excellent. Sorry, who was the first hand up? It kind of went, okay, well, there you go, take it.
Antoine Van Ooyen, University of Sydney. I have a question for Anthony. I like the way how the mission-based economy nugget was put in your talk, which has an implied boldness. Would you be able to unpack that a bit?
Sure. In terms of where we might go in that regard, well, I mean, as I said, we're 2 weeks in, so, and I'm not kicking the can down the road, but I'm being frank. I mean, in Australia, it's part of the debate, but internationally, it's part of. I put catapults in the UK in brackets there, which is one example, but there are many others as well. So. We are expecting to hear a lot about missions, and also I think David mentioned in his presentation precincts. So that locational approach, although it does sound like compared to some other countries, we've been down that road a fair bit more. So, but we're open to hearing what you think is most effective.
Yep. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Werner from Swinburne University of Technology. My question is to Anthony. When you mentioned the next strategic examination of R&D, I thought I detected a bit of a hint of resignation in your voice when you said it follows a long history of R&D reviews. And I've only been working in this space in this country for about 10 years, and I think I've seen one a year or so maybe. So kind of my question is genuine. Have we learned anything from all of those reviews that will make us do this one differently so that we can get the outcomes we're actually looking for, and we can change those stats that you've shown?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that's probably a question for public policy more broadly as well, about the processes by which public policy is formed, and how effective or not they are. I didn't want to sound cynical at all, because I honestly believe that the evidence base has really changed, and that is going to be one really key part of this, because that there's central economic agencies that in Australia that don't really think the R&D is fundamental to driving productivity growth. But so our job will be partly to convince them, but then also to get the right package of supports and policies. So yeah, I didn't want to sound terribly sceptical. I also think as part of the warm up for this process, I've read some of those previous reviews, and I think frankly they went out without, in many ways, without an evidence base, but took a position that they couldn't justify couldn't justify now, I guess, with some of the evidence we have. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Well,